When we begin this particular chapter, I mentioned that there are a whole bunch of different paragraphs. We talked about husbands and wives and how they ought to treat one another, in particular when one of them is an unbeliever. That poses problems. There's a solution to that. Young people, only marry somebody you think is a Christian. I have to put it that way because you don't know whether they're really believers or not. I've seen young men that got baptized in order to get a wife, not in order to be forgiven or to become a disciple. And so you do the best you can. But even doing the best you can, sometimes it's difficult, but it will be guaranteed difficult the other way. But then he talked about how we ought to live, to put away evil speaking and to seek the Lord. That little section, verses 8 through 12, you got to just highlight that and memorize that. That's just a good summary. In fact, Peter says, in summary, on that. And then he talks about, and we'll review this morning, that if we're a Christian, we're going to suffer. Does anybody remember how many times the word suffering appears? I mentioned it several times last week, and you all remember everything I say. 16 times in this book, specifically. Now, there's other references that don't use those words, but the early Christians, they were persecuted simply because they were Christians. They didn't fit in. They were different from the religion that they had been. They were different from the Roman emperor and what he wanted them to be. And so they just stuck out like a sore thumb and were persecuted. And what people really wanted them to do is exactly what people want you to do today. They want you to line up so that everybody is over here and you're not causing problems. And as a Christian, you're going to be over here. And it's going to cause problems on that. And then as we go through this, the last part is the most difficult part in this whole book. There's two passages that are really difficult, and the end of chapter 3 is one of them. Just review very quickly. It says, who is there to harm you if you live righteously? And the answer is normally nobody, but every once in a while, there are those that they object to you being right. Because your being right tells them they're wrong. Your stating that you are right is a challenge to them. And so they preach toleration, but they don't tolerate us, at least, on that. And it says, but even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. Now, this is not because you're suffering due to illness or COVID or your neighbor is ornery. They're doing it because you're a Christian. They object to your religious belief and practice. And in the first century, this was the majority of the persecution of Christians. It wasn't the Roman government doing it. It was the neighbors and the synagogue and your family trying to get you to leave Christianity and come back to the old-time religion. And the Christians had to make a choice on that. The way they do that is you sanctify. That word means to set apart. So what we're going to do is we're going to take Jesus and we set him apart. We set him on a pedestal. We set him on a throne. And we do that in our mind, the way we think about Jesus. He is King of kings, and he is Lord of lords. And he is our Savior and our high priest, and the list goes on. So you set him as Lord, and you're ready to make a defense of everyone who asks you on account of, why are you doing this? Why are you believing this? Why won't you join us in doing these things? And you have an answer for that. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you really want to practice, you can go to either atheist.com or the discussion list on how the world began, creation, and because it's filled with people that will argue with you. And you all realize if you just argue hard enough, you can convert people on Facebook. Not going to happen. So my advice is, don't waste your time on those types of things, but be prepared to talk to your neighbor. Well, I believe because, And you have a reason for that. And while you're doing that, you live with a good conscience. If you think it's wrong, don't do it. Now, you may learn later that it wasn't wrong. How many of you were raised that playing cards was wrong? So you couldn't even play Crazy 8 with your grandkids. We were taught that playing billiards was wrong. Well, at the time that they started that, the only place you could play billiards was in a dark beer joint. But they started having family billiard places, and you could go and play. When I was in college, we had a whole bunch of pool tables, we called them, down in the cafeteria area. And everybody lined up to play. And I moved over here to Rio Concho, and guess what we have? We got a room full of pool tables. And so sometimes you may have thought it was wrong or been taught it was wrong, but your conscience has to be educated. Now, the other is also true. There were lots of things I thought were okay, and as I became a Christian, I had to educate my conscience. And some things you learn quicker than others. But if you think it's wrong, and you do it anyway, what that says is, I don't care what God says. I'm going to go ahead and do what I want to do. And that's the problem. So, make sure you keep a good conscience in all things. Sanctify the Lord because He is the Lord. Set Him apart in your mind. Make a defense. Why do you believe there is a God? You might just take this list that I put there and sit down and see if you can formulate a short answer on why you believe some of those things. Why do you trust the New Testament as being a revelation from God? Why do you trust that Jesus is really the Son of God and the Savior? Why do you act like this? What is your reason for not playing cards? Now, you may find out that they have better reasons and you can learn something. But why do you do it? Now, here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you the next time somebody asks you that question to call me. Why is it I don't believe that? You need to know that ahead of time. You need to know what you believe and why you understand that. It's one of the biggest problems I've met in 50 years of preaching is brethren won't take the time to even learn and think about and synthesize these simple concepts. But you're different. You're going to go do this. Appreciate that. And when you answer them with gentleness. Paul said the same thing over in 1 Timothy. The Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to all, to teach, patient when wrong, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition, if perhaps God may grant them repentance, leading to the knowledge of truth. When I was first studying, doing training program there, man, that was a long time ago. One of the young men walked in and he talked about how he had such a great Bible study the other night because they had made this point and I nailed that. And the guy that I was studying with, he looked at him and said, "So, you baptized him?" And he said, "No, he's not even talking to me anymore." That was a failure. That was not a success. Now, even answering them correctly and gently, they may get so mad they won't talk to you anymore. That's true. But your point is not to nail them when they make a wrong speech. Your point is with gentleness, with kindness, to try to get them to change their mind. So my advice is this. You don't have to answer every argument. What you really want to do, and this is my favorite illustration, you want to put a rock in their shoe. You want to give them something to think about. And gradually, that will be, how do you get a pearl? You put a grain of sand, okay, and then it builds. And that's what happens. It's what happened to me. 5 years worth of arguing it took. It's what happened to my dad. It took 5 years of arguing. And we worked with my grandma for longer than that, and we never did develop a pearl. So sometimes yes, sometimes no. But you're not trying to move them all at once. This is what I've learned. People are just like you, because you're people. And we don't just change everything It's a point at a time, one lesson at a time, one concept at a time. And so find out where they are and work from there. They're not your enemy. Now, we always think of it that way, but they're not your enemy. They're a prospect. Just keep remembering that. And keep a good conscience on that we talked about. And make sure if you're suffering because you're doing what's right. And if you're doing what is right, make sure you're not suffering for wrongdoing. We don't want to give them a real reason for not believing. You know what the biggest reason people give for leaving the church is? And I use the word church in a very loose American way. Anybody that has any religious group or organization is considered church. And the biggest reason is because there's hypocrites. Because the church doesn't practice what it preaches. The church is, and I always laugh, I'm going, but I go to a ball game, guess how many hypocrites are there? I belong to the PTA, how many hypocrites are there? Well, how many hypocrites don't attend church? And the answer is, that's not a good reason. Now, it's a good reason for us not being hypocrites. We don't want to give them a reason on that. So, we then come to the difficult part, and this is found verses 18 through 22. I'm going to tell you ahead of time that as you study this, I've been studying it for 50 years, and I've held different positions depending at what period of time in my life you ask me. And I'm still growing, and I'm still learning. Preparing for this class, I learned a whole bunch of different things. Didn't change my mind this time, but I learned a whole bunch of different things on what's going on with that. So turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 3. My eyes are getting so bad I can't really read out of my paper text. Besides that, I can make the print really big, and I have all these little notes I've made, and I can erase and change and highlight. But starting at verse 18, Christ died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, not the removal of the dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven, after angels and authorities and powers had been subject unto him. This is one of the most puzzling passages. In fact, Martin Luther, after he read this and tried to write a commentary on it, he said, I don't have a clue what this is about. That was my translation of his German. He didn't know, and he didn't even want to take a guess at what he was talking about. I'm going to take a guess. You probably already have taken a guess for whatever it's reading. I learned this week, one of the commentators has spent a lot more time on this than I did. I think he's still wrong. You need to spend more time on it. But he found out at least 200 plus different positions have been taken by people that write commentaries or notes. So if we end up with more than one idea in this class, we're doing good. But I hope you leave this class agreeing with me. Okay. It's really a simple passage if you're looking at the overall of what it's just said. And the overall main lesson is we need to suffer for righteousness because Jesus did. And here's what happened. Jesus came and was rejected and suffered and was put to death in the flesh. What happened to his spirit? We're not talking about that. He was put to death physically. He died. Now, Islam says he never died. Islam's wrong on that. And you all know that. He did die. But then he was raised by the Spirit. And when he was raised, after appearing for 40 days, what happened to him? He ascended. And what happened then? He was set at the right hand of God, given all authority in heaven and upon earth. Every creature that has ever been created made subject unto him. Now, many of them refuse and are still rebelling, but in the end, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. Jesus is what? Lord. What does that mean? Above all, ruler, Lord, master. And every tongue will confess that. You can do it now and be saved, or you can do it then and you'll still be wrong. So this was the main thing. And what he's trying to get you to see is what we learned in chapter 2. Was Jesus persecuted? More than persecuted. Put to death. Then what? Glorified. So if you suffer for righteousness, even to the point of dying, then what? You need to really believe this. Particularly if we go through another period like the Roman period where everybody is against you. And we're moving that direction faster than I wished we were. And I don't know if we're going to turn or not, but I know I'm not going to change. I know what I believe, what I'm going to do. But if it does come to that, that's what they did to Jesus. What happened to Paul? What happened to Stephen? What happened to Matthew? What? And if you can believe the book of Martyrs, a lot of the stuff in that little book, just not true. We don't know. But according to that, every one of the apostles died as a martyr, put to death, killed on that, for their faith. I don't doubt that. I just can't prove that. So if that happened to Jesus, and that happened to Paul, and that happened to Peter, what's going to happen to me? And I'm going to tell you, I feel lucky. My biggest opposition came first of all from my brother who called me a holy Joe and laughed at me. I told you last week I got even with him. I converted him. But also the guys that I worked around. I worked in a music store and all of my buddies there were hippies. And they used to go into their room and to teach a class, and they would light up a joint, and then they would light up incense to cover up the smell of the thing. And anyway, they weren't fooling anybody, and they just laughed at me. And they wanted me to keep doing what I was doing with them. And I kept saying, I don't do that anymore, and you ought to stop. And one by one, they quit talking to me. So I found a church. Good people. They're still great people. One of the editors of the Red Book we're using, Dane Shepherd, good family friend. Anyway, my point in this is, if that happened to them, what's going to happen to us? That's the point he's making here. Now, when we get to talking about what happened and why back with the time of Noah and the spirits, I'll just walk you through how I understand that. Now, here's my abbreviated text. And you'll notice I left out verse 19 and most of verse 20 and 21. Just read verse 18. Christ died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. And we are saved through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven after angels and authorities and powers had been subject to him. That's the point. Can you all get that part? If you want to, what I would do is I'd kind of circle the text and draw a little connecting line, and then we'll deal with the middle part. And the middle part isn't going to change this. And I want you to see that. No matter how you understand or misunderstand this next little section, it doesn't change this. And this is what Peter wants you to really grasp on that. So, Jesus died. He didn't just die. He was put to death. Did he allow it? Oh, absolutely. No man takes it from me, but I lay it down. Could he have called 10,000 angels, as our songbook says? Why would he need to? One would have been enough, from my understanding of that. But he didn't do that. And he died, the just for the unjust. Never sinned, but he died for me who did. And so he died for us. But that's not the end of the story. Because then he was made alive by the Spirit. And so having done that, he then, as Jeff and I just illuminated here, he went to heaven and sat at the right hand of God and was declared to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords and given all authority and power and might. And in the doing of this, he made a proclamation. Now, I read out of the New American Standard Version, and I like it because it says that he made a proclamation. He didn't preach a gospel lesson trying to get people to repent and be saved. He made a proclamation. And what was that proclamation? I am the Son of God. I am King of Kings. I am Lord of Lords. And someday everybody's going to agree with that. So he made proclamation. Who did he proclaim that to? Well, the world got it through the preaching of this, but this was after the resurrection and after glorification. I think that's to all of the spirits, both the good ones and the bad, but particularly to the bad ones. How many times have the humanity had to deal with evil spirits? Now, we live in an age where we don't believe much of that anymore. Well, we believe what we read in the Bible about that, but today, and the answer is, well, there's a problem. But I'm going to tell you, clear back in Noah's day, do you all remember when the sons of God came and married the sons of men, the daughters of men, and there was men. What most of us, we've been explaining this for years and years and years and years, that means the sons of men, the sons of God came and married the daughters of men. And we've explained that as godly men marrying the wrong type of women and then having wrong type of children on that. That's not how it was explained in the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century. The majority of commentators, if you can ever go back and read all of that, they understood that as evil spirits, as demons. Now, my first reaction when I heard that 50 years ago, I went, and I blew it off. The longer I study and the longer I'm around, the more viable that position comes. So, you can disagree with me, you won't be the first, but he brought about in Christ, when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion and every name that is named, not only in this age, but in the one to come. And he put all things in subjection under his feet and gave him head over all things to the church. This was what happened to Jesus when he sat on the throne. He was declared this. This was a proclamation that was going to be made. Now, it's like in the days of Noah. In the days of Noah, Noah preached. He was a preacher of righteousness. What did he preach? Repent, because God's going to destroy the world because of your sin. And how many people listened? Wow. Well, he did get his kids and his in-laws, daughter-in-laws, his wife, and nobody else. How long did he preach? one scripture comes out, it's 100 years, so while he was preparing the ark. Well, it was however long it took him to make the ark. And God patiently waited for Noah to finish the ark. Can you imagine if you were the one to hear Peter or Noah preach this in his second year of preaching? And now 97 years have gone by and he's still preaching this. What is your opinion? What an idiot. This guy's crazy. It's 97 years he's been doing this and it hasn't happened yet. And then all of a sudden, it starts raining and rains and rains. Now, I don't know whether anybody tried to get on the ark as the waters rose. You know, that would be an interesting thing I'd like to have known. But what I know is Noah preached and warned and nobody listened to him. Did it happen? Now, the Lord told us, observe this until I return. Is the Lord coming back? How many years have we been preaching this? Over 2,000. Wow. Well, 2,000 years and you all crazy people keep saying the Lord's going to come and he's never come. Okay, well, Noah's 100 years is pretty short compared to what we're dealing with. But he was rejected. But by the grace of God, God took notice of Noah, and it says that God, by grace, instructed him to build an ark. And what was Noah's response? Hebrews 11. By faith, Noah built the ark. And he got in the ark, and he was saved. Now, here's the text again. The in which, that follows the end of verse 18. He was made alive by the Spirit. In which Spirit, he went and made proclamation to the spirits that are now in prison. So, in his spirit form, in the spiritual world, he went and made this proclamation. And that proclamation is, I'm King of Kings, Lord of Lords. I am the Son of God. Now, those spirits are now said to be in prison. Those are the spirits that were disobedient. Why are they now in prison? Because of what they were doing back here. And so they were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah. So why that bunch? Well, I'm not sure it was just that bunch, but it included that bunch. It included those that were rejecting the very clear message of God. Now, here's what I firmly believe. Do you think what Jesus did was to those from Noah's day, he preached a second chance? And I've never believed that, because I'm going to tell you what happened. If you were evil and you died and you went where we know evil people go waiting for the judgment, and Jesus said, if you believe that I am the Christ, well, of course they believe he's the Christ. Why? They're seeing him. He's on the throne. If he makes that proclamation, what would they do? Well, they would repent and believe. Well, why did they get a second chance and nobody else? I don't believe it happened that way. What I think happened was Jesus didn't preach that if you believe in me, you'll be forgiven. I think Jesus made a proclamation. In spite of what you said, in spite of what you did, in spite of your unbelief, I am King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and I am the Son of God. I'm not going to give up on that. You can believe or not believe. My family can believe or not believe. But that's not going to change. That's what caused me to become a Christian. That's why I'm going to stay a Christian. Jesus has all authority and power in heaven and earth. Don't you ever give up on that. Comes what it is. Now, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8, So, do you all remember when I first came here, I preached a lesson on the early Genesis and the Chinese language? One of the funniest things to me, and that I used all the time when I was going to China, was that the idea of the flood came out to be 8 people in a boat. Where in the world, back 2,000 years ago, did the Chinese develop that idea of 8 people in a boat being a flood? Well, I can tell you where it came from. Straight out of Genesis 6. There were 8 people in a boat. And why were they in a boat? A flood. The flood on that. Now, 8 people were brought safely through the water, and they landed on the other side. What happened to those that were ungodly? What type of a world did Noah land in? A start-over world. Not a world filled with ungodly people. A world that was filled with 8 people. But they were 8 people that were part of a godly family on that. And what was the first thing that Noah did? Planted a vineyard. And what do you get from a vineyard? Grapes. What do you make from grapes? And if you don't watch it, it will ferment. And then what happens when you drink it? And that's what Noah did. Got drunk. And then that brought the sinful world back into existence in this clean, sanctified world. And where are we today? We're about back to Noah's day before the flood. That people's thoughts were upon evil, and that continually. We're seeing that. I don't know what's going to happen. Now, in which spirit he went and made proclamation. He didn't go and preach. And the proclamation was that of victory, power, authority, and position. To the Spirit. Now, some people still think that was the spirit of the bad people in Noah's day. Others think it was the evil spirits, the evil angels. That one, you're going to hear preachers preach this both ways. And you just have to make up your mind. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes I wake up and study this passage, and all I want to do is flip a coin. Because there's good arguments on both sides of this. I want you to note, every single word in this passage has been argued about. So I started going to the Greek. Because if you just go to the Greek, it answers everything. And the first thing that I found out, it didn't answer anything. Because what are they arguing about was Greek words. And this Greek word, when it is in dative mode, means this, but you can also have that Greek word, and it means the locative mode. And, I don't preach that in class because nobody understands what in the world you're talking about, because you don't understand what you're talking about. My answer to all this is, I don't really need to go back to the Greek. It's not any plainer than the English. And if you can't understand it, and this is one of those, I don't know. But now, in Peter's time, they're still in prison, and Jesus made the proclamation. Now, they're still in prison, even though it was disobedience in the days of Noah. What's the point? That just like Jesus, Noah's preaching was rejected, but he was saved. Even so, our message will be rejected by the majority of the people. Are there many or few that will be saved? Quote Jesus on this. Few. Why? Because there's that broad way. And many, many, many want to go down that way because it's easy and it's fun and it's what I want to do. And it's ungodly and sinful, and you're going to... Okay. And few there be that enter the narrow way. Why? It's restrictive. It's narrow. Okay. How many of you have had people that you've talked to that have rejected what you said on your understanding of the Bible? Man. How many people did Jesus preach to? You know, in Luke chapter 12, one of my favorite statements is, there were thousands of people that were trying to listen to Jesus. And how many people were left believers? We don't know, but not thousands. In Jerusalem, there was 120. But, for example, that man that had the demons cast out of him from the area of the Gerasenes, I don't think he was part of that 120. But do you think he ever forgot what Jesus did to him? Do you think he ever forget watching 2,000 pigs run down over a cliff and drowned? So many of the people that you hear about, I'm going to tell you what, they would have never forgotten that. But we never hear from them again. But I know what, if they went home and told their family and friends, they probably were rejected. Nobody likes that. So we are going to be saved. Now, baptism saves us because it is the antitype of the type. And we get this all confused. And first thing is, baptism is not a pattern. You got to go somewhere else. Peter's not talking about baptism as a pattern. For example, I learned this from my wife. You can buy a pattern for a dress. That would have been the type, the pattern. That's what that Greek word meant. Now, what do you get from that type? You get the dress. Now, that's the anti-type. Not against the type. It just means here's the pattern, but here's the reality. Now, you could do the same thing with a tree and a shadow. The shadow of the tree is the type. The tree is the real thing. So when we took a look at it, the boat of Noah was the type. What's the antitype, the real thing? Baptism. Whoa. In this sense, Peter said, baptism does now save you. Noah's salvation through water was the type. The type, and the pattern is our baptism. And so what happens is, in our baptizing, being baptized, we had an appeal or a declaration of a good conscience, a pledge of a good conscience. When you were baptized, you confessed, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. But you confessed more than that. You said, I believe. How many of you had the preacher ask you, do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? And sometimes as preachers, we rattle that off like it's no big thing. Well, I'm going to tell you, do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? And when you said, I do, and you were then baptized, you entered into a covenant relationship with Jesus. And this is sacred. And so this was a pledge of a good conscience. And when you connect the good conscience, verse 16 and verse 21, they both talk about it. Verse 16 says, now that you're a Christian and you get persecuted, how are you still living? With a good conscience, doing what is right on that. So the victory. Back to the main point. Jesus died. By the way, you all noticed I kept reading and it says once for all. That's a really unique Greek word. And you know what it means? Once for all. In fact, one of the definitions I memorized, once for all time validity, never having to be repeated. But that's too long. But that's what it meant. Jesus died once. Never to do that again. Never having to do that again. It's always available. And he did that for us. And then he was made alive by the Spirit, raised from the dead, and ascended unto heaven, and given glory and authority at the right hand of God. And somewhere in that, he made a proclamation. I am the Lord. Will the angels believe that? I'm going to tell you, they believe that now. What about the rich man that died and he wasn't godly? Does he believe? Now, I know I'm not supposed to do this. Do y'all remember Carl Sagan? He's now a believer. What happened? He died an unbeliever, but he now knows Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. He died an unbeliever in the existence of God, but he now knows. That's not funny. I don't mean it to be funny, but it is serious. So, what did we just learn? I don't know what you learned. I know what I attempted to teach. So I gave you the notes. There's some really good quotes in that note. And just wrestle with this passage. And you may wrestle with this for the rest of your life, and that's okay. But remember, the main point is right here on this last screen. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to follow the pattern. No, I don't want to add anything. I want to just follow the pattern. Yeah. So, next week, chapter 4. It's only taken us a month to get there. Thank you.